Hello, welcome back to the sewing room. I'm Laura, and today I want to talk about one of the most important tools in any craft, which is time. This is me being a little bit goofy, but I do kind of mean it too. Obviously, if you don't have time to do anything, then you don't have time to do anything. But more to the point, years ago I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was kind of, oh, I made my dress. And he was like, how long did it take you to make your dress? And I said, about a day. And he was like, wow, that's really impressive. That sounds really fast. And I thought about it and I was like, well, okay, it kind of depends on both the dress and the day. At the time, I wasn't working outside of the home, and I was very anxious about the state of the world, and I was just cranking out very simple knit dresses because I wanted something, frankly, to feel good about. Now, I don't want anybody to be intimidated by this idea or to be scared off of sewing because it does take some time. But as my dear departed friend Annie Modisette used to say, people who make things not because we want the things, but because making things makes us happy. So, what better way to spend your time than doing something that makes you happy? Anyway, like most people, well, I should say, like most people I know, I do work outside the home, and so I don't really have all day to just lounge around and or get really dug into my sewing room. So instead, I basically have designed my life around it, hopefully having about 30 to 60 minutes just about every day where I get to sew. Obviously sometimes that gets interrupted by life or whatever, but that's kind of my goal. And so most of my preparatory steps for getting ready to actually sew a garment, thankfully, do break down into things that can be done in about 20 to 30 minutes a piece, depending again on how big the project is. But I thought I would take this moment to just kind of show you all the steps that go for me into making even just a very simple dress. I'm not doing any fitting changes. I'm not drafting anything. I'm using a commercial pattern. So these are the steps that I made to go through getting ready to sew a relatively simple dress. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously there are, I've never claimed to be the world's fastest sewer. I'm definitely not even in the top whatever. I'm a regular person who learned to sew not a million years ago. And granted, there are probably some things that I could do faster. And there's also a question of like, to what do you attribute each particular step? Like, for example, we all hopefully understand that we need to maintain our sewing machines at some level, and do things like clean the serger before we use it if we have a serger. But okay, so I just said before we use it, I do tend to clean it before a project because it's easier to make myself do it then. If I tell myself, oh, I'll do it afterwards, I'm not going to do it. I'm much more motivated to make sure that the machine is running well at the beginning of the project than at the end. And honestly, I have at least one sewing machine manual that also says that the best time to maintain and oil your machine is actually right before you start to use it, because then the machine will get, run a lot, and that will help distribute whatever you've put on the machine. So anyway, side note. All of this is to say that, not everybody's process is going to be the same, but this is just what I do for getting started on a brand new sewing project. And again, there are things that make something go faster. If you're making the same thing more than once, I do think that tends to go quite a bit faster, partly because you already have some of the preparatory steps done, but also because then you're kind of mentally more there. Like, you don't have to stop and like think and read so much. If it's something you've already done, you already kind of get it. I just thought it might be instructive for people to see the kinds of steps that I go through just to make a very simple dress, even just to get ready to sew a very simple dress. That, again, it's not complicated, there aren't a million steps, but it might be a little bit more than you might think. But then along the way, I'll show you some tips for hopefully getting the most out of your time and not having to, backtrack or fix any mistakes. You can't sew if you don't have fabric. And as so many things do, you need to start by preparing your fabric. And I, I think some of us, I know that I have sometimes tried to find excuses to skip this step, but frankly, not pre-washing your fabric, except for in very, very few cases, you're kind of setting yourself up for disaster. There's all, maybe it'll shrink, maybe it'll pill, maybe the dye will run, and I would rather have all of that happen before I actually spend time sewing the thing. And those of you who are eagle-eyed and watching this video closely will note that I am preparing a black fabric here, and the rest of the video is a blue fabric, and that is because I remembered to record, hey, you gotta record a prep step, after I already had pre-washed the blue fabric. So just so you know, this is what I do. Again, unless I have a really good reason not to, I usually just zigzag stitch together the two cut edges of any piece of fabric before I pre-wash it, just because I feel like that helps keep down the fraying a little bit, and also hopefully keeps the threads from warping as they go through a spin cycle and a tumble dry. And yes, I do pretty much always spin cycle and tumble dry most fabrics, again, unless I have a really good reason not to. And for cotton fabrics, I do highly recommend washing and drying that fabric twice, because cotton can sometimes shrink more than once. And again, I would much rather have it shrink before I sew it than have it shrink after and not fit the way that I expect. So anyway, before you're even starting to get ready to sew, is to prepare your fabric, which I'm doing here. Alright, now that your fabric is under its preparation stage, you're ready to enter preparing your pattern stage. And I actually have this little iron I use for sewing classes because it's light and easy to take with me. But I also like to use it to prepare my patterns before I use them, because I don't tend to keep water in it, and so I'm much more confident that it is not going to leak any water or steam onto my patterns, because I don't want that. It's paper. So basically I start out by opening up the pattern, making sure that everything is as it should be. And what's nice about the way I've set up my sewing room now is I can kind of put my instructions like right there, which is so convenient. And so yeah, I'm opening up my pattern and showing off that I love this about folkwear patterns, is that they have little references. They're not the only company that does this, but it's nice if you do really want to get dug in and look up more books on the subject. They've given you the ability to do that by showing you where to go next, which is kind of nice. So here I am checking the layout to making sure that I have everything that I think I need. I do fidget while I'm reading. It's funny what you notice about yourself when you're filming yourself doing something that seems so simple. I do like to just take a quick glance even before I start anything else. And then now here I am actually opening the pattern paper. And then I'm going to press it, and you don't need to see every single second in real time, so I am going to fast forward this part. But short notes are, dry iron, no water, and you do want to press your pattern out, because otherwise all these creases will lead to errors in your pattern making experience. This is not a sponsored video or an ad, but I do like to take a minute and tout how much I love WowWack. But one of the reasons that sewing can sometimes take longer than you want it to is that you need to stock up on supplies, which is why I like to really stock up when I stock up. And this is several cones of serger thread, and there are certain colors that I do just buy all the time. White, gray, if I'm low on black I get some black, And in this case, I did pick up some kind of teal uh, serger thread, and you'll see later I ended up kind of deciding that I didn't love the way that worked. But anyway, I know that if you look at the cost per meter of certain, oh, there's a belt buckle I was thinking about using that for a belt. But anyway, cost per meter for serger thread is much cheaper than regular sewing thread, but you do want to be careful. You don't want to, you can't really make a one-to-one swap. Serger thread is not really strong enough to be used for actual construction and seaming. So don't whoa, sorry, my cats are running around. Don't be penny wise and pound foolish and try to force serger thread to be something it's not. Right, paper, tracing paper. I bought a huge roll of this tracing paper from Wawak, gosh, a while ago, and I use it all the time. I don't know when I will use it up, but one of the things I use it for is when I'm tracing a paper pattern that's on this thinner, darker paper, I put a layer of white paper underneath, which makes a world of difference in how easy it is to see the lines. If you're working with a pattern that doesn't come on a heavyweight white paper, just putting a layer of paper underneath, just plain white paper, will really make your life a lot easier when you're tracing. And for those of you new to the sewing world, there is sometimes a little bit of a debate on whether tracing is better or whether just cutting the pattern out is better. I think you can tell from this video I am on team trace all the way. And it's because maybe I have more than one size I want to make out of this pattern. I want to make sure that I'm honoring the work of the pattern maker and not wasting resources. And frankly, I don't want to buy the pattern again when I don't need to. And in this case, I'm especially making a size for someone else who's not even myself, and so I am. It would be a tremendous waste for me to cut up the pattern now at a size that I may or may not use again. So I take the moment to trace. Very first step on tracing for me is to put that grain line in. I use a ruler for that because otherwise, what's the point? And I put that grain line in, and then I line up with the grain line on the pattern, and then I'm ready to actually start tracing the pattern out. And again, this is not Swedish tracing paper. This is a different paper that has you can see it has kind of crosses and numbers on it. And I really like it because especially if you do think you might want to do alterations, I do find having a little bit of a framework already in does help with that. It kind of gives me a starting point for things if I'm going to make changes. So you can see me here I am tracing. So here tracing out the pattern. Alright, I apologize for the angle of this next thing. It's a little hard to see, but the point I'm trying to make is that after you have traced your pattern, or I guess even if you haven't traced your pattern, you have to cut it out. And one of the things that I do that saves me a ton of time is instead of using scissors to cut out my pattern, I use an old rotary cutter. And basically, this is the first style of rotary cutter I ever purchased, and I don't absolutely love it for cutting fabric, but it works fine for cutting paper. And essentially I just keep a blade in there that, I don't worry about changing that much because I do know that paper dulls blades of all kinds really fast. And then one day if it starts to really get on my nerves, and I'm changing the blade for my cutter that I use for fabric, I'll just swap the old fabric blade into the paper rotary cutter. So as you can see, this is the style that I prefer for cutting fabric. It's just a personal preference. It doesn't mean it's really better than the other one. It's just one I like better. And then this is the older one that I have that I originally purchased that I like better for cutting paper. But basically it saves tons of time over using scissors. Fabric has been washed and dried twice. And now you guessed it, we have to press it. So you can see this is my different iron, the iron that I really use at home in the sewing room the most. And it is beautiful, nice head of steam on it. And I am just going to gently press the fabric flat. So, long story short, flat pattern, flat fabric together leads to more accurate sewing. So if you do skip these steps, you are definitely setting yourself up to have a slightly more difficult time. So don't skip these steps. Well, you see me trimming something on this, and basically the fabric did snag in a couple of places while it was in the wash. So I'm just trimming out the snags and keeping an eye on those when I cut the pattern so that it's not, you know, front and center on the garment in a way that's going to be bad. There really were just a couple. It's just, I'm not really sure what happened, but you know, these things happen, so you just kind of deal with it. Ready to cut. Fabric's ready to cut. Pattern pieces are ready to cut. And although I think I bring it over the rotary cutter, but I do like to always have both the rotary cutter and scissors or shears when I'm cutting. Sometimes there's little details can be hard to get with the rotary cutter, and especially I like to use it for doing things like cutting snips into fabric to show where the marks are, and cutting is another one of those areas where you kind of hope it goes quickly, but frankly it's worth taking the time to do it with great care, so don't rush yourself, although I'm rushing this by speeding this up. Another detail I do like to make sure I'm doing when I'm cutting is marking the wrong side of the fabric. In this case I'm using small pieces of tape so that I can easily tell which side is which. And this seems a little funny, but I think it's especially important on fabrics like this one that don't have an obvious right and wrong side, and here's why. If you don't mark your wrong sides, it's very easy to get confused about which side of the garment you're working on. And so, for example, two left sides together when you meant to make one a left and one a right, or to accidentally make both of your sleeves into a left sleeve, and that's very annoying. So even if the fabric looks the same on both sides, or actually I guess you could say especially if the fabric looks the same on both sides, it does save you time if you mark your sides, because that way you won't get confused during the construction process. Fabric is ready. Still not quite ready to sew, we're getting there, but I have to start by changing my thread color out, and in this case that also means winding bobbins in this blue thread that matches the fabric. So just a little reminder that this isn't a time-consuming task or a difficult task, but even if you are, say, asking someone to hem your pants for you, if they have to change the thread on their machine, that's still going to take a little bit of time to set up. A little note here about this cone of thread here. I do sometimes buy my basic colors, white and black, and I think navy, on these extra huge cones, and for that you really kind of have to use a thread holder, which you can kind of see at this angle that I have back there. And on this machine I do like to use a thread holder for both the large cones and any cross wound thread. That is cross wound, not stack wound. I just think it kind of runs a little bit better, and since I already have the thread stand, I might as well use it. So that's why you see that the thread is not visible from this angle, because it's behind the machine on the thread stand. So yeah, this is the process of winding bobbins. How many bobbins do you need for each project? That kind of depends on basically how patient you are with yourself. If you are someone who is doing kind of a bigger project and it's a color that you don't use a lot, you still might want to consider winding 2 bobbins at once, because after all, once you have the machine set up to wind the bobbin, it's a lot faster to just go ahead and wind them both at the same time. And if it's a color that you use a lot, like white or black, it also makes sense to just go ahead and wind a couple of bobbins. If you're just doing a really quick project with a color you don't use a lot, then it might make sense to wind just 1 bobbin for a project, but that's up to you. Once you have your bobbin wound and your needle threaded and your fabric ready, I like to always grab a scrap of the fabric and just double check that my machine is sewing at the correct tension and that I'm getting a stitch formation that I like. It does take a few minutes to do this, but it can save you lots of trouble in the long run to just double check. How's your needle doing? How's your machine sewing? How's everything going? Happy with those? Time to check whatever your seam finish is going to be. And in this case, I am going to finish my seams with the serger. So I am checking to see if the serger settings work well with this fabric on a piece of scrap. Now, I don't normally care that much if my thread matches my fabric exactly, especially since I'm only going to be using the serger as an edge finish, not to actually stitch seams. So technically it doesn't matter, but since this is a gift, I care if the person who gets it thinks that I look professional. So the teal green is too green. Obviously this is blue, although I thought, well, stay in the same color family maybe, but no. This might be a good option if I didn't have any other options. It's at least similar in kind of darkness. Although I did check, even with the white, this fabric isn't sheer enough that it's not going to show through. So really I could do anything. I'm actually really liking the dark gray for this. I do really like gray as a neutral, and I have light gray and dark gray. I think the dark gray actually looks better with this bold color. And then this looks black here, but it's actually navy. I almost wish I had a purple if I didn't have the exact blue, which I don't. But I think for this one I'm going to end up going with the dark gray. Friendly reminder that if you fail to maintain your machines, you will have a worse time at everything, and frankly it's much easier for me to make myself clean a machine before I sew with it than after, because when I'm done, and I'm like, yay, I get to go enjoy the thing. So don't forget, you need to also stop and consider cleaning up a machine if it hasn't been cleaned in a bit. I didn't number the steps, but I counted about a dozen steps here to get ready. And of course, some of them you may choose to skip, and some people may have more steps before they're ready to sew. But just one of those things to keep in mind if you're ever wondering, gosh, why does it seem to take me so long to get started sewing? Well, if you get started sewing off on the right foot, you're going to have a better time when you're actually sewing. Here I am. You can actually see my little tape marking the wrong side of the fabric so that I know that I am sewing the correct pieces to each other. If this is your first time stopping by the channel, thank you so much for stopping by. If you've been here before, welcome back. Either way, I hope to see you soon.